Let's continue with the anterior pituitary and learn the next 5 hormones. So that makes a total of 7 hormones produced by the anterior pituitary. The next one, actually the next 2 hormones, are collectively known as gonadotropes. They're called gonadotropes because their target organs are the gonads. The female gonad being the ovaries, male gonads being the testes. The first of the 2 gonadotropes is follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. It gets its name for the function in females, which is to stimulate ovarian follicles. Ovarian follicles are structures within the ovary that contain the developing oocytes, or eggs. So in females, FSH initiates the development of oocytes and induces ovarian secretion of estrogen. FSH matures the ovarian follicles and gets them ready in order to ovulate or release the egg into the fallopian tube. In males, FSH stimulates the testes to produce sperm. The next gonadotrope, luteinizing hormone, or LH, stimulates secretion of estrogen and progesterone in females, triggers ovulation, and helps form a structure called the corpus luteum. For us, the most important function of LH in a female is to trigger ovulation, which is releasing an egg from the ovary into the fallopian tube for transport towards the uterus. So LH can act as a marker for ovulation in a female. There are kits that can be purchased that measure high levels of LH, and therefore it can tell the female when she is ovulating. In males, this hormone also stimulates the testes to produce testosterone, and then testosterone helps stimulate sperm production. So those are the 2 gonadotropes. There's a hormone produced by the hypothalamus called gonadotropin releasing hormone that stimulates the production of these 2. And that hormone is produced at puberty. So these 2 hormones are not produced until the onset of puberty. The 5th hormone produced by the anterior pituitary gland is called prolactin. A good way to remember what this hormone does is to think prolactation. It promotes the production of milk. So together with other hormones, such as estrogen, prolactin promotes milk production by mammary glands. I want you to underline production. There's another hormone that's going to stimulate milk ejection from the breast. But this one stimulates just the production of the milk. The 6th hormone produced by the anterior pituitary gland is called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. The name tells you its target. Its target is the adrenal cortex, which is the outer layer of an adrenal gland. So this is an adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidneys. This hormone, ACTH, stimulates that adrenal cortex to produce a set of hormones called glucocorticoids. The number 1 glucocorticoid is known as cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, which we will talk about later on. The final hormone produced by the anterior pituitary gland is called melanocyte stimulating hormone. Its major target is the brain. The exact role has not been completely figured out, but it does influence brain activity. When there's large amounts of this hormone, it can darken the skin, and that's where it got its name, melanocyte stimulating hormone. So those are the 7 hormones of the anterior pituitary gland. Many of them are controlled by hormones, tropic hormones of the hypothalamus. This image and drawing just helps us clarify a little bit about ACTH from the previous slide. ACTH is the hormone produced by the anterior pituitary gland. But there's a hormone called corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH, that must be produced by the hypothalamus in order to stimulate the production of ACTH by the anterior pituitary gland. Then ACTH goes into the bloodstream, finds its target, the adrenal cortex, and stimulates the release of cortisol, the stress hormone. So cortisol is a stress hormone. It lowers immune responses like inflammation. So that's an important hormone we'll get to when we get to the adrenal glands. But cortisol can be synthesized and given as a drug that reduces inflammation. You've probably heard of hydrocortisone. Hydrocortisone is a synthetic form of cortisol used to treat inflammation. On to the posterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland controls the release of 2 hormones. These 2 hormones are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. I must emphasize that these 2 hormones are actually synthesized by the hypothalamus, but they are transported to the posterior pituitary and then released. Let's start with oxytocin. Oxytocin targets 2 main organs. One is the uterus, in that it stimulates uterine contractions during childbirth. The next are mammary glands, where it triggers the release of milk from the breast, or milk ejection. So again, they are produced at the hypothalamus. They are transported to the posterior pituitary and then released. Oxytocin stimulates the contraction of the smooth muscle of the cells of the uterus during childbirth and stimulates contraction of myoepithelial cells in the mammary glands to cause milk ejection, also known as letdown. So this hormone is the one that ejects the milk, whereas prolactin and estrogen help synthesize the milk. The next hormone is known as antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is an important hormone that conserves fluid in the body. In fact, we are going to use the next image to help clarify antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is produced when the body is extremely dehydrated. That dehydration is detected by what's called osmoreceptors of the hypothalamus. So when we are dehydrated, the hypothalamus detects the dehydration and synthesizes antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. This hormone gets transported using neurons to the posterior pituitary. Nerve impulses liberate the ADH from the axon terminals in the posterior pituitary. Then the hormone is released out into the bloodstream. Once in the bloodstream, ADH has 3 primary targets. Kidneys, which will then retain water and as a result decrease urine output. The next target are sweat glands in order to decrease the release of water, decrease perspiration. And then finally, arterioles. Arterioles are small arteries that can have a dramatic impact on blood pressure. When we are extremely dehydrated, blood pressure will tend to drop dangerously low. In order to keep that blood pressure up, arteries or arterioles will constrict. Constriction means they decrease their diameter. What this constriction does is increase blood pressure. So, said again, ADH is produced in response to dehydration, tells the kidneys to retain water, tells the sweat glands to stop sweating, and tells arterioles to constrict in order to maintain proper blood pressure. This is the most important hormone in maintaining fluid balance. An interesting fact is when an individual consumes alcohol, alcohol suppresses the production and release of ADH. And when an individual has low ADH, they tend to urinate more. Therefore, alcohol acts as a diuretic because it reduces the levels of antidiuretic hormone. The next video, we're going to talk about the thyroid gland and the parathyroid glands.